Welcome to the Project Endure podcast, the place where we talk about life, endurance, persistence, perspective, and so much more. I'm Joe Rinaldi, and I'll be your host. Let's jump in. Before we get started, let me thank you for being here. The stories on this podcast are meant to let you know that you're not alone in what you're going through and that we can all find strength in struggle with the right perspective. If you've been enjoying the podcast, let me ask that you leave a review on your platform of choice to help us grow so that we can continue to make the world a better place, one conversation at a time. Now, let's get to the episode. Welcome back to the Project Endure podcast, episode 162. We have myself, Joe Rinaldi, and in Colorado, a very, very, very special guest, Ryan MacTaggart. Ryan, how are you?
Good, Joe. 162, man. Should be proud of that. That's solid.
You know what? We've got some bonus episodes in there that don't count toward the numbers. So it's more like 166 or so. But I appreciate that. It's been such a blessing to be able to have conversations like this into the triple digits. And I'm excited for when we hit the 1,000 mark, and we'll have to have you back before then, I'm sure. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We haven't even started yet.
1,000. Oh, yeah, you got on.
I don't know if you're going to be any good. So
True.
I am just kidding. We've known each other for a while. I already know this is going to be an amazing conversation. And before I get too far ahead of us, I'd love for you to introduce yourself to people listening.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you asked me ahead of time, what's your least favorite question? And it was, what do you do? So thanks for asking that right off the top. Yeah, a little bit about me. So I'm in Colorado. I've been in Colorado my whole life, actually. And currently, professionally, I'll talk about professional first because it's not first on my priority list by any stretch, but it is something that I think is interesting. I have a PhD in education and human resource leadership, which is a very fancy way of saying I went to school for a long time. And a lot of that was because I didn't know what to do. I've struggled with purpose and my calling and all those things for most of my life. I would say I still do, honestly, at this point. But I think school was something I was good at. So I went and did that. And then now I work as a professional development kind of specialist and curriculum developer. So help people move their careers forward, which is a pretty fun thing for me to be a part of. More importantly than that, I'm a Christian, so a follower of Jesus. He's my number one example of what I try to be and what I fall short of, as we all do. I'm a dad. I have a son who's about to turn 1, which is super, super awesome. We were talking before we hit record. Just best thing of my life. It's just so great. And then a husband to the most Christ-like person I've ever met, which has just been a super big blessing for me. So, and I love fitness, love endurance. And I think that's how we came together a couple of years ago. So a little bit about me.
That was perfect. And we're going to dive into a lot of those different aspects of life as we go through this conversation. But to start, I was scrolling through your social media before we started talking, and you've got so many great just little words and sentences and thoughts just all over the place. And I wanted to read one out loud. And if you could expand on it, I think it'd be a cool way to start things off. So you wrote on this sticky note. Sticky notes are your thing, by the way.
I do have a thing for sticky notes. Yeah.
And so on this one, it says, insecurity yells, knowledge talks, wisdom whispers. Learn to listen for the whispers. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I think about and work on a lot is how do we get better? How do we develop? How do we grow as people? And we live in an era that self-help has gotten really loud. So the Instagram culture, the social media culture of self-help, but a lot of that, the loudest voices are sometimes the shallowest, because the lack of depth requires voice and loudness. That's not always true. Don't get me wrong. I think there's some very loud voices that are also full of wisdom. But I think even, even in scripture, you can read instances where the wisdom, the deepest knowledge, the wisest things usually come in the small, quiet moments. And so in a world full of noise and loudness, I think we have to learn how to hear the small voices in our lives. And those might be people that are kind of on the fringes, or take time with a good book and actually sit with it and read it, and not to read it for the sake of saying that you read it or to read 20 books this month because that's your goal, but to like actually read it. And I think that's a whisper instead of a shout. So that's kind of where that one came from. And everything I do on social media, every sticky note I write, it's a note to self, man. It's a reminder to myself to lean into the whispers and not lose those soft voices in life, and not discount them because they're whispers either. So
I'm going to do my best to tie in a lot of these different thoughts through our conversation because you speak so eloquently about them. I mean that, and I think part of that is you spend so much time thinking about these things, reading about these things, reflecting on these things. So before I give you the next thought that I want you to expand on, how many books would you say you read in a calendar year if you had to estimate?
in a calendar year, 12 months, probably 150, 170 maybe. Depends, depends.
You recognize to the normal person out there that is absurd, right?
I do recognize that. Yes, but I essentially know. I just had a thought this morning. I was like, do I read too many books? Like, what would it mean if I just read one book like over and over and over? And there's a couple books that I've read over and over, like 3 or 4 times. But I do wonder sometimes about that. So,
Mm.
I don't want that number to feel like an aspiration for people. But for me, I just love knowledge. I would say, at the beginning, I talked about not knowing what my purpose is or what my gifting is. And I think the more I think on it and the more I lean into it, I've been given a gift of learning and then sharing. I just love that. And that's the art of the sticky note. It's funny, maybe it'll benefit. What I love about a sticky note is you can't write that much on it. It forces you to like be clear, be concise. And behind every one of those sticky notes is probably 5 of them that were crumpled up and tossed to the side, in my office. But I think if you're going to talk about something, share something, you're going to read a book, try to write that book on a sticky note when you're done reading it. And that'll really force you to think through it. Or if you have something important to say to a friend, a colleague, a spouse, write on a sticky note first and see if you can get down to what that thing is. So that's why I love the sticky notes, because it just helps me, not talk about 150 books, but talk about one thought.
So, if we were to, before getting into the big, deep, typical questions on this podcast, go into, a challenging thought. I want to ask about tension. I want to ask about tension in your life, tension in all of our lives. And the tension that I want to focus in on is the tension between what we know to be true and then how we live our lives. So the
Mm.
tension between what we say we believe versus what we act out into the world. And to be specific, there's a post on your page, and you talk about what society tells us and what truth is. And on what society tells us, that side of the sticky note has get more, do more, never rest, grind, 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 et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And on the truth side, there are just three things. And it says, be peaceful, be thankful, and then there's reference to a Bible verse. And so
Hmm.
there's this tension that we all live with. We're getting conflicting messages. Deep down, we know one thing to be true, or maybe some of us understand there's this one thing that deep down I do believe is true, but we might have trouble acting that out. How do you
Hmm.
navigate the tension between all of these conflicting ideas?
Not well sometimes, I think honestly, if we're honest, but that's life, isn't it? I mean, that's where the beauty of this whole thing is. It's in learning, deciding what your values are. And I do believe in a certain level of truth. I do believe in a big T truth. I actually I worry that one of the challenges in our society is the loss of the big T truth. And it's become, you do you and you follow your own truth. And that's really hard because you are a very fickle person. Not you necessarily, Joe, but like all of us are.
Yeah.
Like one of my favorite authors, John Mark Comer, he talks about when you're in the aisle at the grocery store, and you'll relate to this, you're a fitness guy. And on the one side of you is like a magazine that's like fit people, six packs, running marathons, all that. And you're like, I want that. And then you go to this side and you're like, I also want that candy bar all the time. Right. And so, like, what's the truth? Is the truth that you want this, or is the truth that you want the other? And the answer is yes. And so you have to kind of decide which one wins. And I think to navigate it, you have to have that be really clear. And so I think, to give a really practical thing, what I try to do is every year I try to sit down and I review what are my three top values. And then my decisions through that year are fed through those three things. And some of those values stick year after year after year, and some of them don't. And I consider that not a failure that the value doesn't stick, but growth, right? Like, I'm
Mm.
different now than I was then. One of those was the grind. Like, I was a disciple of the grind for years. Like, the harder I work, the busier I am, the better and more valuable I am. I now believe that almost complete opposite of that. So, I had to change that one. But in the midst of all the influencers you could listen to, all the things that you could take in, I think you have to pick your top 3 to 5, and
Mm.
everything goes through those 3 to 5. So when you're on social media and you see something that's like, oh yeah, I like that. Does it fit with your 3 to 5 though? Or is it just a fun video that someone made, which is cool and inspiring, and that's great, but it can't change all your decisions in the moment. You gotta know
Mm.
who are you? What are those 3 to 5 things for you right now? So that's how I try to navigate it, but it's hard. I mean, it's hard.
It is hard. And speaking of hard, I want to narrow in on one thought before we move to the regular questioning here. So the thought would be, as Christians, so you and I share the same faith, and some people listening to this also fall into that category, and some
Mm-hmm.
people don't. But I think everybody can tune into this part of the conversation and get something from it. You know, you and I believe that we can't earn our salvation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's that part of us where, hard work can't earn, the most important thing to us.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean we shouldn't work hard. And so how do you navigate? Yeah, how do you navigate, right? And maybe I'll just throw out a phrase and I'd love to hear your thoughts. God
Yeah.
can't steer a parked car.
Mm-hmm.
How do you navigate that tension between you can't earn what really matters most, and at the same time, you should work hard for things that matter?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, first of all, in the phrase, God can definitely steer a parked car if he wants to. So if you're parked and you think and you're called, like, it'll move. I've been there. I think I was a parked car for a long time. I came to faith at 24, so I was a parked car until then, I think. And but to answer more, of your direct question, navigating, we don't earn it through work, but work is good, I think, is where you put the work. So is work the means to the end, or is it the result of the end that you already have?
Mm.
All right. So am I working to get this thing, or do I believe that I am good, that I am valuable, that I can help people? So I go work as a result of that belief. So the work isn't the earning, it's the result of what I believe in and what my values are. So I'm not earning my salvation, I'm given that, but because I'm given that, and because I'm given love, I feel I can't do anything but go give that love and work to other people, right? Because I'm overwhelmed by the gift.
Mm.
So it's like, what do you do with it? I just like, cool, thanks. you know, thanks. See you later. I mean, maybe, right? And I think there's moments for that, but the hard work in life, it's valuable not to earn me something, but because I was given something so great that I just want to give it back. So, and the Bible talks about that a lot, but even getting away from just Christianity, like, why do you go to work every day and do the best you can? Why, Joe, do you do the best you can for your clients? Yeah, sure, they're going to pay you and I'm going to get paid my paycheck. But ultimately, like that could change in a moment for a ton of reasons, no matter how hard I work. So
Mhm.
going every day and working as hard as I can is more, I want to give that to the people that I impact every day. I want to support my family that I love every day because I love them, not because I want them to love me back, you know? Does that, I don't know. I went a little circular there, but did that make sense?
It made perfect sense, and I appreciate you sharing that. And you know, we are given the gift, and at the same time, we're given gifts disguised as hard things sometimes. So
100%. Most of the time.
when
Most
when
of the
you
time.
when you look back at all of those things, those hard gifts, if you will, and you look at all of them through your entire life thus far, what's the hardest thing that you've ever had to handle that you did not choose for yourself?
Yeah. I've listened to a lot of podcast episodes of this podcast, so I know I'm going to fall into a theme here, but I'm going to give you two. One of which I think is a very common theme because it's a very human experience. The other one, maybe not as common, but I think people relate to it. The first one, though, is I went through a season of life from Memorial Day 2011 to the end of the summer 2013, in which I lost a lot of people that I cared deeply about. And up until that point, I hadn't lost anyone in my life. So it was this like, it's all good. And then a lot of loss. So Memorial Day 2011, I lost my grandma, who, you expect to lose your grandparents, but she went from very healthy to very sick very quickly. And then there was a weird, like a long kind of decline after that. But it hit really hard because she was kind of a second parent to me for a big chunk of my life. And then about a year after that, my dad passed away suddenly. No, talked to him on Friday, good to go. Sunday, got a call that he was gone. And then within the next 2 months, lost an uncle and an aunt, and then lost a relationship that I thought at the time was going to be a marriage. I thought that's where we were headed. And that also ended without much warning, and it kind of blindsided me. So none of those were choices that I made, but the difficulty of learning, like, who am I in those moments of loss and pain, and how do I handle it? Um, how do I not try to handle it? Right? You can't solve that problem. But I think getting those phone calls, like I hit a point where I was like, I just hope my phone doesn't ring today. Because if it rings, it's bad news. Like that's how I felt for 2.5 years. And it was just an overwhelming sense of what the heck, you know? But the best lesson in it was you're not in control of it. You're just not. And as much as you want to control everything, you can't. You can't choose what my dad did. I can't choose what took my grandma's life. I can't choose any of that. But how I responded and how I stepped into the family and didn't, honestly. It's sometimes I didn't handle it the way I wanted to. And a lost relationship. I think that would be the hardest, the first one that I would talk about. Just that season, that like 2 year, which is kind of interesting because it was over the course of time. The second one is a little more recent, and actually it's a little vulnerable for me to talk about because I haven't shared this with many people. But I went through a season less than a year ago where taking my own life was very much on the table for me. And I've never thought of myself as like depressed. I've had a lot of anxiety through life, and I come from an achievement background, right? So I'm sure a lot of people that listen to this can relate. I mean, at the Ironman starting line, I was, one of everybody who's like an overachieving like person. But um, I hit this wall where I felt like the world and my family might be better off if I didn't bring my anxiety and my struggles into their daily lives. Um, and that was a tough place for me to be because I hadn't felt that way before. Got some help, talked to some friends. Um, Honestly, the best thing I did was one day I just took a shower because it forced me to like not take an action that I had thought about taking. And so I'd say those are the two. One is very long, like a long-term thing that I dealt with over time. And then one was a very acute, but very intense, difficult moment. And the suicidal ideation, some could say like, well, that is your own choice, but I wouldn't put it in that category.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate sharing that vulnerable thought. And we might as well start there and then we'll rewind and, and,
Sure.
and go to point number one. But, I'll just be the first to say that I am so glad that you're here.
Me
We
too.
don't, yeah, we don't talk all the time or often, and we have our seasons of more frequent communication. But yeah, man, I don't know. The world would just be not as good of a place without people like you. And it's hard for me to imagine you going through that because you are so, in my eyes, composed and thoughtful and, all of these things that just feel like, yeah, you struggle. We all struggle, but you're in control. Tell me about what it was like to realize that you were in the season where those thoughts were coming up for you.
Yeah, I mean, it was terrible, right? And I mean, you go like back to my faith, and it's like that should save you right there, but it just didn't. It didn't. I don't know. It was like I didn't know what to do with that, and then that spiraled. And I think for a lot of people, and the reason I share it with your audience, and I'm not sharing it with everybody, but I think a lot of people that feel that way do look like they've got it all together. I mean, like there's a commercial going viral right now. I think it's from the UK, but it's two men, and there's kind of one that's like consistently kind of down and depressed, and the other one is like happy and upbeat and everything. And then when the last scene is the depressed one still at the soccer stadium and the other one isn't there. And it says, check on your friends, right? Because no one thought to talk to that guy about what was going on. And I think that's kind of what I experienced was I didn't know how to share that side because on the surface, everything is great. And everything is great, but the darkness to go into the mode of like, I bring a lot of anxiety, I bring a lot of fear. Maybe everyone would just be better. And yes, they'd be sad for a minute, but they'll get over it. Like those are the thoughts that went through my head, which is lies. It's complete lies. Like now that I can come through it, that was all the voice of an enemy that was like, you have power, you're going to do things that help people, and I want to stop that. And this is a way for me to try to do it. So I'm so glad I was able to come through those lies, but in the moment that felt like absolute big T capital letter truth. um, you're not as valuable as you think. You don't even know what your purpose is. You don't know how to contribute. Who can you really help? Look at all these other people who are helping millions, right? Every time I would get on social media, it's like, man, I am just, who the heck am I, right? I mean, I felt imposter syndrome when you reached out to me to be here. I'm like, what the heck? Why would I be on there? Like those are but that's what I had to catch. And in that moment, I didn't catch those things. I just let them become truth. And so for anyone who's ever felt those kinds of things creep in, find somebody who can help you because I didn't go to a therapist and say this is what I'm dealing with. I reached out to a friend of mine and said, "Man, I'm struggling. Can we talk?" And I got on the phone and I just started saying these things to him and he literally sat there and said, "That's a lie. That's a lie. That's a lie. That's a," for like an hour. And by the end of it, I'm in tears, he's in tears, but it got through to me eventually that these aren't truthful statements that I'm telling myself. And then I was able to build back from there. So I think that was the feeling is like you asked about the feeling of those moments. It felt like water going down the drain and there was nothing I could do to stop it. And it just kept getting faster and faster and faster and faster. And
Mm.
it took my friend to like put the plug in for a second. And that second was all I needed. You know, I didn't need years and years. I just needed a second of someone to be like, whoa, wait. Um, and it was really powerful. So that's how it felt.
Well,
It was dark for sure.
yeah. If okay, so let's say someone is dealing with any thought that they don't want to be having, but they can't help
Hmm.
but shake, and it doesn't have to be the ones that you were having, but just any thought
For
that
sure.
they don't like, but they're not sure how to get rid of. If they don't have someone to talk to that they trust that is easily accessible, are there ways with an internal facing kind of dialogue that you think people can sparse out, okay, this is a lie or this is the truth, or maybe even going to other resources that are, inanimate objects or,
Mhm.
books. What would you recommend in that scenario?
Yeah, the first one is write it down. It's much harder. Like if you can't write it down, it's definitely not truth.
Hmm.
And it's a lot harder, at least in my experience, it was a lot harder to write those things than it was to think and say them. That's why I think, Joe, you and I share like a love for writing because it forces you to like really think about what you're doing. So anything you think, like even if you think it's the best idea in the world, like write it down first and it might make you think about it.
Hmm.
But all those things, like if you can sit down and just write them out, and then one exercise I did is I wrote them all out and then I went through and I crossed out the ones that weren't truth according to, as we talked earlier, my values that I've set out, right? So I decided at the beginning of this year what my three values were. And I went through and I was like, well, that doesn't fit. That doesn't fit. That doesn't fit. And it was hard because you can talk yourself into anything, right? So you can be like, but my values just crap. But if you don't let yourself do that, write them down, cross out the lies, you won't be left with much.
Hmm.
Which what I also found in doing that is most of the thoughts were the same thought in different ways. So it ended up being like two things that were really actually causing a lot of this other like spiraling that was happening. So when I was able to get down to those two things and then I could actually take action on those two things. But I couldn't take action on this like incessant voice in my head. So writing calmed the voice. The other one is, I mean, the Bible is important for me, but also, Tim Ferriss did a podcast one time because um, he actually almost took his own life at one point as well. He did a really, I thought, really well done podcast that I went back and listened to after my thing. And in the moment, I didn't think about that podcast, but it's funny because when I re-listened to it after, a lot of the things I did to come out of that moment were things that he talked about. So
Hmm.
I was like, oh, maybe that's sunk in deeper than I thought. So that might be a good resource for people. But if it's dark enough, there is a free hotline as well that you can call in the moment. And there's always someone 24/7, 365. I've never called that number, but I do think if you're really in a dark place, call that number, if nothing else.
Hmm.
Um, Social media is probably not your best place to go in that moment. So try to find those people in your life that are like right there. I think narrowing the circle to your own thoughts on paper and the people that live in your home, live next door to your home, or you grew up in a home with, that's probably the best advice that I could give.
That's great advice. This might take us on a bit of a tangent, but I think it's worth it. Um, you were the one who told me that sometimes when you're writing, if you're going to take a break from writing, let's say you're going to end the day and then pick up the next day, you'll
Yep.
end in the middle of a sentence.
Always.
Tell me more about that.
The thought isn't finished. So when you come back the next day, you pick up the momentum. Where if you end with a period, the momentum is over. Especially if you end with the end of a paragraph. I'd never do that. Never do that. So if I'm writing and I get to the end of a paragraph and it's kind of the end of the writing session, even if I don't have a good idea, I'll just start the next sentence with like some random thing that maybe might fit. But I've just found it to be a complete momentum builder for me. So yeah, that's all that's about. Got me through dissertation. I've used it to, I've got three first drafts of books sitting in Google Drive. So yeah, I've used that trick with everything. Preparing for, giving speeches or running workshops, I do the same thing. I always try to end in the middle of a thought, not at the end of one.
Mm. It's so counterintuitive, and yet it makes so much
It's,
sense.
yeah.
So let's go back then to the first hardest thing that you mentioned, that,
Yep.
2 or so year stretch that you experienced back in 2011 through 2013. Through all of that loss, you recognize that you're not in control. Is there anything that could have prepared you to go through that season, or was going through that season what you needed to prepare yourself for for going through that season?
It's a good question. Um, I was in my early 20s. So, like, I don't know. I think in that, for me, that was the gift of growth in and of itself. However, the only regrets, I don't even call them regrets. The only thing that I think could have prepared me more was to stop treating the moments with the people that I had as if I would just have infinitely more of them. But in my early 20s, I don't know if I would have thought about that. But like I think about my dad, like the weekend before he passed away, we went and played golf and I wasn't playing well and I got angry and I was like frustrated and like I wasn't having fun, he wasn't having fun. If someone would have told me that this is the last time you're ever going to walk a golf course with this man, no way would I have gotten that way, right? No way would my ego have been able to take over. And so I think that's the only thing I think I could have done to prepare myself better was just stop assuming that this would be an infinite moment. And even now, like saying that to you, I'm like, man, that sounds good. I do that today, right? Like I do that with my wife every day where I'm like, oh, see you tomorrow, right? But I will say I am more intentional and I do think about maybe I won't. And not in like a dark, like, negative way all the time. But like when I say goodbye to her in the morning and she drives off to work, I don't take for granted that I don't know what that day is going to have for us. So I think that's the only thing. Like, I don't think any book or anything could have prepared me, but just, don't treat it like it's infinite. And I think Jesse Itzler and Rich Roll, on a podcast once talked about like, how old are your parents? Right? My parents are in their 60s. How many times a year do I see them? Five or six. So that means if they live to be 80, I can count, I have like 15 more times to see them. So instead of thinking about I have 20 more years or 15 more years, I think I've got 30 more times to spend with them. I think that more of that mentality would have not prepared me to lose those people, but I think upon losing them, I would have felt better about what our relationship was before they left.
Mm. Yeah, I don't know where I heard this, but at some point we all play outside with our childhood friends for the last time and we don't know it,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah, or I think about, at someday you're going to pick up your kid for the last time. You're not going to know that, but it's going to happen, or we're going to have our last conversation someday, right? And I hope that there's many, 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 but if that day is today, I want to feel okay with that. And I think there's people that say like you should, you'll feel great about it. I'm like, no, I don't feel great about it. I don't want to lose anybody, but will
Yeah.
I feel okay with it? Yeah. And that feels good. Where I think some of the people I lost in that 2 year stretch, I didn't feel that okay. I wish there were things I could have said. I wish there were things I would have done.
Hmm.
And that was a bummer. So,
Hmm. Is there anything that you do to remind yourself that of what you just said going through everyday life? Because like you mentioned, it can be really, really hard to keep that at the
mhm.
forefront of our minds.
Yeah, I wish I was better at it too, but I do have, um, gosh, you know me, I'm going to look at a book right now. Where is it? I know what color it is. Yeah, so I mean, I have 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Berkman and Time Management for Mortals, which is kind of like an anti-productivity time management book, which I love because I used to be the productivity like, yeah, and I'm less like that now. So this book resonated with me. But he has a poster that he makes, the 4,000 Weeks poster, and it's right there. I'm looking at it right above my computer screen, and it's got a little white box for each week of the 4,000 weeks of the average life. And the ones I've already lived are blacked out. And so every week on Sunday, I know you do the marble, right? So
Mhm.
similar. Every week on Sunday, I black a square out, and I've circled the week that my son will graduate from high school. So like I can see it is not that big, right? Like my whole life is like this big of dots. My time with him before he graduates is like that. And so that's one thing that does remind me. Otherwise, I think just on a daily basis, I just try to remind myself too. And then gratitude is helpful, right? Because you do gratitude practice and it's easy to be like, thank you for that person. Thank you for that person. Thank you for that person. But if you really stop and think, like, what if this was the last day I get to be thankful for that person? Um, that's helped me too, but it's not every day. Trust me, it's not every day.
Yeah. And I think just to preface any part of our conversation that we have, nobody's perfect at anything that they're striving to do.
No.
And that goes for you and me included. Uh, and I'll share this because I was talking about it with somebody earlier this week. But every single morning, so all right, I have a run streak of 790 days. Today was 790.
Step it up, man.
I could only go so fast. I'm waiting on the sun every day. Uh, but what I recognized was that Michaela and I have been married now for a little over 4 years, and we've been together for around 7. And early on in our relationship, she said it first. She said, "I love you." Uh, long story, I got burned when I asked her out the first time. So I was holding back. So she had to say that part
Good
first.
for
But
you.
yeah. But ever since that day, there hasn't been a day that's gone by that when we were, just dating or engaged that we didn't text or call or say I love you.
Hmm.
And not a single day since we've been married that hasn't been said. Right. That's my streak, right? That's my streak, my I love you streak. That's way more
Hmm.
important to me than any run streak. And that will continue until the day that one of us is no longer here. And it's more than just saying it. It's living it out. It's
Hmm.
not something that you can just express verbally. It's something you have to do, and it's not always easy. But where I'm going with this is, I was laughing with someone because I blow Michaela a kiss every morning when I leave the house. That's just our thing. Like even if we're outside on the sidewalk, separated by 100 feet, and our neighbors are outside, I'll find a way to sneak it to her, and she'll blow me one back. And it's cheesy, but in a way, it's
I
almost
love
that
it.
that ritual of like, okay,
Hmm.
we're saying goodbye, and this is my opportunity to remember, that this is precious, and I want to remember
Hmm.
this goodbye. Yeah.
I think it's super important to have rituals like that because without it, the default is to not do that. And I think that's the thing is I've been really interested lately in what I'm calling maturity 3.0, which I don't know what that's going to mean, but I think there's levels of maturity in life. The first one is kind of like puberty, physical. You can't really stop it. The second one, I think, is this moment that you become aware that you're kind of responsible for your own crap, right? Like you got to pay your own bills, you got to get your own in life. If you meet someone, you owe it to them to like figure out your own stuff a little bit. But then there's this level 3, which is what we're talking about, which is this like gratitude that just flows through your daily life. It's not something that you have to write on paper every day. You don't have to do the 3 things at the end of the day. You just kind of live with it. But what I'm thinking more and more and finding true is rituals like that, short, small, quick, efficient rituals
Mm.
are the power of keeping you at that level. So blowing the kiss to your wife, cheesy. Actually, I think the cheesiness actually makes it better because it's like goofy, right? So now it's also this inside joke that connects the two of you in a very deep, meaningful way that other people are like, that's kind of weird, but whatever. Um, but those rituals matter. And so many people have rituals around exercise, nutrition, but they don't have rituals around love and friendship and hope, right? Those aren't rituals, but they will dang sure be in the gym every day at 4:45 a.m. because that's what they told Instagram that they were going to do. Can you
Mm.
build that same accountability for gratitude, love, fellowship, hope? I think you can. I think you
Mm.
can. It's a work in progress, but that's an example of it is what you do, I think.
Sure. Well, I appreciate you putting an academic, eloquent spin on that,
Yeah.
and I agree
I
though,
don't want to
and
ruin it with academics though. You just do it because it's great. You should do that.
I do, and it makes me wonder, and my wheels are turning right now. What does that look like for every other interaction? And maybe I'll blow you a kiss at the end of this. No, just kidding, but
Hey, I'll
you
take
know,
it.
what does that look like to have some sort of ritual or some sort of reminder every time that I interact with somebody that I care about, or even just to set the tone for every new interaction with somebody where I'm entering into a space that is precious because me and this other person are sharing our precious time that is fleeting, and it deserves to have some sort of a certain level of presence, and maybe there's a ritual or a reminder that can go along with that. So you've got me
Yeah,
thinking. You've got me thinking.
perfect.
So with all that being said, I want to shift gears and ask you, what is the hardest thing you've ever done on purpose, and why did you do
Mhm.
that thing?
Yeah, I thought about this one ahead of time, and I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go with Ironman. So I completed an Ironman in 2021, and I was tempted to talk about grad school because I tried to quit grad school like 3 or 4 times. So the hardest thing was just like staying focused, getting it
Yeah.
done. But Ironman is the one I'm going to choose. And I know that there are many people who are going to listen to this who have done more than one, and they're going to be like, hey, man, you could do it. But for me, I think what made it hard is the exact reason I chose it. I had never run more than 5 miles when I signed up for my Ironman. So I had never done a triathlon. I had never run a marathon. I didn't own a bike. I
Mm.
had mountain biked, but I had not ever been on a road or a triathlon bike. And I hadn't swam since I did swim lessons when I was like 7. And so it was like the ultimate, like, I can figure this out. And I did. I mean, my time wasn't, I kind of set a time goal, but my main goal was like finish. And then during the race, I was like watching the clock, and I was like, my goal just quickly became finish before the sunset. And I did that too, just barely. Like my finish line picture, the sun is setting, and my picture with my friends after, it's dark. So it's like, I was like, yeah, right there. Um, but I think that was why it was the hardest thing, was because yes, it was hard physically to just do it. I mean, it's a long day, but the training, the everything I had to learn, but that's what I loved about it. Like I didn't know anything about endurance. I didn't know how to eat for being on a bike and running and swimming for 13 and a half hours. Like I didn't know anything about that. I was a baseball player growing up. Like we went out in the field and stood around and played a little bit, like it wasn't like that. And so I think that would be it for me. That was the hardest thing I ever did on purpose, I think.
Mm. So if we rewind to the beginning, and you are, let's say, you don't have the background that would scream like Iron Man is the thing that this person should do.
No.
You chose it anyway. Was there any point along the path that you thought maybe this isn't for me and maybe I shouldn't follow through with this?
Yeah, a couple. I got a pretty severe calf injury about 3 months out from the race that I couldn't run for almost a month. So that clearly became like, whoa, how do you wait? I have to train to run this marathon. Like, what am I going to do? So injury was one of those moments that it was like that. And then also just like I had one moment where I was out and I was doing a brick workout, which is like a bike and followed by a run to practice that transition. And I mean, I was out there for like 4.5, 5 hours, and got a text from my wife and was like, hey, when are you going to be back? Like this. And she did not mean it this way at all, but I felt this guilt all of a sudden of like, what am I doing? Like, why am I away from my wife? I didn't have any kids at the time, so that was different. But I was like, why am I away from my family for like 6 hours every Saturday morning? Um, and I think to overcome that, I just had to remind myself that in order to be my best self for them, it wasn't about me being fit enough to run an Ironman, but there was something mental that I was doing and that I was training for. And she was very awesome about honoring that and being like, wow, this is amazing. Like the things you're learning, the things you're doing about yourself are benefiting all of us. So it was just reminding myself that the purpose was bigger than the finish line. But the finish line was awesome. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I loved that part. I thought it was super cool. But yeah, so I had to overcome injury, overcome that. And so it's kind of a physical and a mental moment of, man, I really think I should quit doing this.
Mm. Do you have anything in your life that feels that way right now?
Whew. Joe. Yeah, writing, 100%. And you and I have talked about this for years. I have had the dream and the goal of writing a book forever. To be able to see a book with my name on it on the bookshelf would, I don't even know. I would break down, I think, in that moment. And I've had 3 or 4 ideas that I've started and stopped and started and stopped. And it always comes back to, I don't know what my thing is. I don't know what my thing to write about is that other people would find valuable. Because even in this conversation, you can tell I'm kind of not all over the place, but a little bit of a general. Like I don't have like, let's talk about this little topic. Um, so yeah, I think writing is the thing right now and unfortunately, I've actually convinced myself to stop. unlike Ironman. I
Mm.
think the difference is Ironman had a very clear date, and writing a book is like, eh, no one knows you're doing it anyway. I don't have a publisher or anything like that, so
Mm.
that's the one that comes to mind.
Yeah, I know you and I have talked about this offline, and I believe I've told you this before, but every time that we talk, and now people listening could be witness to this because they get to experience it as well. But every time we talk, I leave a better person. I have new questions that are floating through my mind, uh, challenging ways of thinking that are now, running through my blood. I have encouragement. I feel a calmness. I just feel grateful that I get to spend this time with you. And I would imagine that no matter what you chose to write about, whether it was a singular topic or a whole bunch of different topics, that people would read a book like that and walk away feeling similar things. So you have to promise me that I get to buy one of the first copies whenever the book is done.
You don't
Uh,
even have to buy it, sir. Trust me, I'll send you one.
all right. Signed
Yeah, I
though.
appreciate that. Don't push it. Yeah, no, it's fine. Yeah,
Mhm.
I do honestly believe in my heart of hearts that that will happen someday, um, sooner than later. And I think there's been a season of, I call it gathering, and there's a fine line between procrastination and gathering. Don't get me wrong, but I've tried to start a couple times and I've hit walls of like, I don't know enough about that to feel like I want to write about it yet. So I've gone into seasons of learning, and I do feel this sense of like, I'm getting there. I feel there's a couple topics that are sitting in my heart that just won't go away. And I think that's a sign that something should be created. So whether people create content, videos, they write, or they just journal or whatever, when that thing just won't go away, that's when I think you've got to honor it. And I've got two of those right now. So
Mm.
hopefully we can move on it.
Are you open to the idea of sharing what one or both of those topics are? And you could say no
Sure.
and keep, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. No, because they're like, um, so one is very work related. So I do a lot of work around leadership and
Mm.
purpose-based leadership. And so the work-based one is a book on or thinking about effective delegation for the empowerment of others.
Mm.
Because I think delegation is often seen as a way to like work less and to give things to other people and make them do it. But I think really meaningful and purposeful delegation, whether it's to employees, team members, kids, is actually an intentional empowerment of other people.
Mm.
And I think talking about that would be really cool. The second one is much not work focused, but I actually would love to research, talk to people, and write about the subject of hope, mostly based out of my experience of we talked about earlier when I felt like maybe taking my own life was an option. The
Mm.
definition of that is hopelessness.
Mm.
And I would love to come out of that experience and not use that as a way to get publicity and like get people to care about my story. But I think a lot of people feel even small moments of hopelessness, and a small moment of hopelessness overrides years of hopefulness. And
Mm.
I think that there's something in there, and I don't think our society pushes hope very well. I think it pushes other things. So if I could contribute by helping people understand and come to places of hope, that could be pretty cool. So
Mm. So, along the lines of hope and hopelessness, to you, is there a difference between being disappointed and being discouraged? And you can sit with that for however long you need because this is completely out of the blue. But when you hear those two words, disappointed versus discouraged, is there a difference between those two to you?
what comes to mind first is I'm going to feed off of kind of Brené Brown's work of guilt and shame.
Mm.
So guilt is behavior, like I'm guilty, I feel guilty for this thing that I did. Shame is I'm shamed of who I am. And I think maybe disappointment and discouraged is similar. Disappointed is like, I'm disappointed in the outcome of that thing, which a lot of times isn't even in your control, right? Like, if nobody listens to this podcast, I might be disappointed in that, but I'm not discouraged by it because, like, I didn't have that choice. Now, I would love if anyone could give feedback so we could get better, right? Like, then I would want to ask those kinds of questions. But I think disappointment is more being disappointed in a behavior or an outcome and feedback could help you grow. Where discouraged, I think, is that next level of being kind of discouraged about something more central to who you are. So this podcast didn't get looks or views or listens. So I'm now discouraged that I'm not a valuable person. It feels deeper. Now that could be complete fluff and I could Google these and be like, what the heck was that? But that's what resonated with me is I think there's a level. So disappointment, I think, is really healthy.
Mm.
And being disappointed in yourself is a signal that asks for some feedback. How can you grow? How can you get better? Discouragement, I don't know, there's something else in there that maybe you need to look a little deeper under the hood for
Mm.
what are you really feeling discouraged about. And I think to take it one step further, then communicating disappointment to people is different than communicating discouragement to people.
Mm.
Don't discourage people, but it's okay to share your disappointment. I mean, I'm a leader. I lead a team at work. I share disappointment often, right? But as a way of, okay, now what do we do? Where discouragement feels like don't do anything.
Yeah.
Feels like a stop sign, like, oh.
Mm. Yeah, and I didn't want a textbook definition because I wanted the Ryan definition, and
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, at least.
I love that. And so one more quick tangent, and then we'll get back on track with the next question. Uh, if someone out there has to have a hard conversation, whether
Mm.
that's they are, a manager and they have to talk to somebody below them, provide feedback or talk about something difficult, or it's with a significant other or a friend, and the conversation is just uncomfortable, but they have to deliver something that the other party might not love to hear. Do you have any encouragement or advice, even guidance as to how somebody can deliver that or have those conversations well?
Yeah, the first one that I will say, and this is something that I have to remind myself all the time, I I owe it to that person to have that conversation. They deserve it. And that's hard, right? Now that assumes that I'm being very intentional, I'm not just like throwing unjustified negative feedback at this person, but if it's really something that's going to impact our relationship, their growth, and I have evidence and I can give next steps, I owe it to that person to have that conversation. And sometimes that's the little boost of courage that I need is like, if I can authentically say this is to help them and benefit them, how dare I hold that from them? And, I've had conversation with friends. Like an example I'll give you is one of my friends got a little too into like partying and drinking. And you and I share, I've never drank in my whole life. And I had to go have that conversation and I had to continue to tell myself, like, this is for him and his family. This is for him and his family. This is for him and his family. And then I think the other tip that I can give is people may have heard about the compliment sandwich method, right? Say a good thing, put the bad feedback in there, and then end with a good thing. Uh, Stop. If you do that, stop doing that. That is not effective. Everyone knows what's coming. No one's listening to you anyway when you try to give those positives. So I learned this from Adam Grant. But one thing I say, this is more employee than it would be like friend or spouse. But I say, I have a lot of positive things I want to share with you, and I have some areas that I can offer you some growth. What do you want to hear first? And I let them tell me. You want the positives? You want them, and different people choose different things. And I'm like, great. I did have one person that was like, "Can you give me some positives, then the negative, then the positives?" And I was like, "Dang you, you just went right back to it." Um, but I think letting them know a little bit of what's coming, and
Mm.
then I think honestly, just you have to be honest and you have to be clear.
Mm.
So, can you put this on a sticky note going back to the very beginning of our conversation? Try to share with them at like in a concise way first. If you're kind of doing the rambling, like, well, I want to talk to you about, well, this day, this thing happened, and then it kind of led to that, like, yeah, no, you're losing people, right? But if you say, hey, the other day, this is what I experienced from you, that's also powerful. If you can, like, what did you experience as a result of that is a powerful way to have difficult conversations. But be honest, be forward, and then sit back and listen. I think that's the other thing that a lot of people fail in difficult conversations is they talk. And they talk and they talk and they talk because the difficulty, they're nervous. And so it's like, you get it? Did you get the feedback? You understand? Great. Bye. No, right? Give the feedback and then sit back. And that's hard. You got to wait. Same tactic in negotiation, right? Set your term and then stop talking. Same thing when difficult conversations and giving feedback. And I think, especially with people you love, that's a powerful tactic because it honors their humanity in the experience to offer you something back. It isn't this one way, I'm better, let me tell you what you did wrong. It's this is what I felt or what I saw. Give me what you felt and saw, right?
So simple in theory, and
In
yet
theory.
so
Mm-hmm.
hard in practice.
And it takes practice too. It takes a lot of practice to do that. Silence is really, our society hates it. And so you have to practice building it in. So practice it in non-difficult conversations first. Ask a question and then don't answer it yourself. Right? Because we do that stuff all the time. And if you just start thinking about it, you'll notice yourself doing it all the time.
So I have a client who I worked with for a handful of months, and they were a resident at a hospital. And one of the challenges that they continued to come to our calls with was my coworkers, my attending, people tell me that I'm not kind. And I think
mm,
I'm a very kind person. And what we ended up coming to a mutual understanding about was that their version of kindness was very direct, right?
mm-hmm.
Someone had a diagnosis where they might not live for more than 6 weeks. And this person would go into the room and say, you have 6 weeks to live, make the most of it. Right. Right. So
Yeah.
what we understood together was that kindness is telling people the truth. Kindness is, to a certain extent, being direct with people. Like you said, it's having a hard conversation with someone because they deserve it. But what we also realized was that there's the intention, which in her case was very good. Um, there's the delivery, which in her case wasn't what how people wanted it delivered. And then
Mm-hmm.
there's the perception as to how the other person's going to perceive it. And the delivery is within your control, but the perception is not within your control. And so, good intention, maybe the delivery needs to be nuanced and you need to read a room. And then the perception is not within your control. And that can be hard because in your heart, you can be being kind to someone else and
Yeah.
delivering something that you see as valuable. And the other party might not be ready or in a place to receive it that way. And that can be really, really hard. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Mm. Yeah. Huh. That's a good question. I mean, gosh, if the other person is ready or not, that's a that's a tricky one, right? Because in that scenario, like you have 6 weeks to live, I would say that ready or not, here it comes, right?
Mm.
Because I owe it to you to let you know that this is not a long timeline that we're talking about. Now, could that be done with more nuance, like you said, in the terms of like, I have some tough news to share with you. I'm I am feeling it. Like, but I'm just going to share it with you directly because that's the kindest way I know how, right? So you tell them what you're doing, I think is sometimes powerful.
Mm.
So if they're not ready or you're not sure they're ready, I think starting with, I am doing this right now because I don't, it doesn't solve the problem, right? And I think in difficult conversations, like people leave pissed off sometimes, you know? Then it's follow up, right? Then it becomes about the follow up and how you follow up. I had a team member, this happened to me, that I had to give some tough feedback, and I I knew they were going to leave because they didn't agree with this feedback, and I knew that going in, right? And they have a little bit of a more of a victim mentality sometimes, or they had. I don't no longer work with this person, but and so I knew where this was going to go. I was going to give the feedback, and the response was going to be, "You're wrong. You don't really know. Here's all the reasons why you're wrong." So I gave the feedback. I sat quietly while they did that. And at the end of the conversation, I said, I understand that you may not agree with me. Let's revisit in a couple days and come back to this. And so we did. And honestly, after 48 hours, they now agreed with me and we were going to work on solutions. But they did have some nuance that I didn't know about.
Mm.
So they shared with me that one of the reasons that their performance was lower was because they had a family thing happening. And I was like, well, that changes me and how I'm going to come at this too. So we reached mutual agreement. But I think a lot of times, it's a power play in difficult conversations of I'm the supervisor, I'm the parent, I'm the whatever, and I'm here to tell you what to do. And that'll never go well.
Mm.
Now, as a parent, don't get me wrong. Sometimes you just, for the safety of that child, there are things that are like, no, you can't do that. But even then, like, give a little rationale. Why not? You're not going to hurt anybody by doing that. So, yeah, I don't have anything really keen on what you said. I think that's a great question for us to think about. And if anyone else listening has stuff, I think that would be a great conversation to continue.
Mm. Well, I'm going to bring us back from this tangent that I took us on, and we're going to go to the second to last big question of this conversation, which is a simple one. This is the Project Endure podcast, and I'm wondering for you, Ryan, when you hear the word endurance or endure, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, for me, endurance is the mental, spiritual, and physical ability and skill set to continue through things when you don't want to. So the simpler way to say it is you want to stop and you don't. That's how I think about endurance. Yeah.
So there's a C.S. Lewis quote that I had pulled up for our conversation and wasn't sure if or where it would fit in, but I'll share it now because the way that this quote defines faith is in some ways similar to how you described endurance. So C.S. Lewis said, faith is the art of holding on to things in spite of your changing moods and circumstances. So
Yeah.
when you
Love
no
it.
longer want to do something, how do you stay the course? And I don't know if I have a great answer that works for everyone all the time, but I would love to hear any expansion you have on the concept of faith and endurance, or just holding on to things and pursuing things despite how you feel.
Yeah, I think unfortunately we live in a world that honors our feelings a lot or believes that they should run our life, right? Like how often, how you feeling today, right? Like, I don't know. It's not that valuable of a question.
Mm.
I think there's other questions that can be asked, right? But I think our feelings have been given kind of a pedestal. But then I also think that there's a side of our society. I did some work on masculinity a few years ago, and there's this side of the world that has gone too far the other way, I think, where it's like everyone should be a stoic to the max degree. Well, even the Stoics weren't, they didn't believe that there was no such thing as emotion. So somehow our world has taken that and like drawn it too big. But I think understanding what your feelings are for,
Mm.
right? And your feelings are not designed to run your life. They're designed to warn you of things or get you excited about things in moments, right? So your goals, things that you care about long term that require endurance, aren't feeling things. They're value things. Knowing that difference, I think, is key. And in the moment, I feel this way, but I value this. Now, hey, go feel your feelings for a while. I'm not the person who's going to tell you that you shouldn't feel your feelings. I know people that don't feel feelings and they are going to explode someday. And I don't know that I want to be around for that. But don't let them change your values.
So I mentioned the run streak earlier, and someone asked me this question over the weekend, but why have I continued the run streak? Part of it, if I'm being honest, is because I'm drawn toward things that are extreme or excessive, and
You're stubborn.
I'm very stubborn. I'm a Taurus, but I have what I would consider an addictive personality, and that's the reason why I stopped drinking. Back in, when was that, 2012, 2013? It's been a while. Um,
Yep.
and it's also the reason I work out so much. It's the reason I have this run streak, but also The run streak exists and has continued on because it gives me the opportunity to do something that I don't always feel like doing. And I get to continue that commitment because I said I would. And
Mm-hmm.
it might not make sense to everyone, but I can't tell you that there are many feelings that are better for me than to start a day wanting nothing less than to just not do the run and to do it and get it done with and feel a sense of accomplishment, to feel proud of myself, and to start a day showing up for what I said I would do. And it's not about the running, it's about that. And it
Yeah.
makes me better.
I mean, if I only did things that I felt like doing when I felt like doing them, my life would not look the way it looks now. That like I mean like 100%. And I do like me, I'm a cold plunger, so whatever. But someone asked me recently too, my mother-in-law was like, why do you do that? And like I started by spouting off like, oh, inflammation, like all that stuff. But then I paused and I was like, you know what? It's because I don't want to. I don't want to, right? But it's a way to remind myself, and it takes 3 minutes, right? Your run, I know you run like a mile. It's at least a mile, right? Isn't that
Uh-huh.
what you do?
Mhm.
Running a mile takes 8 minutes or whatever, right? 9 minutes, 10 minutes. It's not this huge, massive chunk of our day, but it's just this reminder that I don't want to, I don't feel like it. But when I'm done, I'll feel better. And I think that's a muscle in a way of like, now I use that all the time. Like, I don't want to work out. I do anyway. I always feel better. I don't want to have that difficult conversation. I do anyway. I always feel better. Right. And now it's like this constant reminder that if I don't let my feelings win in this instance, I will feel, ironically, more positive afterwards. And I have not ever experienced that to not be true. Like the cheesy, like the only workout you regret is the one you didn't do. It's cheesy, but it is dang true. Just
Mhm.
yesterday, my workout, I didn't feel great. I was like, I'm just going to go through the motions. Within 10 minutes, I'm doing the workout as it's supposed to be done because that 10 minutes built that momentum. And afterwards, felt great. But
Yeah.
I knew that would happen because of the years of practice in doing that. Now I'm having a hard time applying that to my writing practice right now. I really am. I want to, but it's like another level of getting there. So always a work in progress. But yeah, feelings matter. Feelings are signals. So you need to know and you need to be in touch with them, but acting upon them, yeah, learn to filter it.
Mm. So, if you're listening to this podcast and you are on the fence about whether or not you should work out, whether or not you should fold the laundry, whether or not you should wash the dishes, whatever it is, and you have the time in your day, go do it because Ryan says you'll feel better. And I agree. Um,
I mean, yeah, it's, the other thing I think is true. You know the right thing to do. You know what you should do, right? Like there are very few decisions through the day that you actually don't know what the right thing to do in that moment. Like the right thing is to clean the dishes in the sink before your wife or husband or whoever gets to it because you can serve them in that way. You know that that's the right thing to do.
uh,
So I think sometimes it's honestly just being honest too with yourself and being like, all right, I know the right thing to
yeah. So, Michaela, if you're listening to this, dishes are in the sink. I'm just kidding. I can't leave dishes in
do.
the sink. It really bothers me. I'm one of those
That
people.
doesn't surprise me at all, Joe. That feels on brand.
Yes, that is on brand. So, all right. With all of that being said, we've covered a wide range of topics, all great stuff. To bring it back to kind of the core of this podcast and what it's all about, there are people out there who are going through it. Some of them are dealing with loss, some of them are dealing with spiraling thoughts, some of them are dealing with injuries, setbacks, challenges, obstacles. Maybe they just feel lost. If you had the opportunity to speak directly to those people who are struggling right now in a tough season, what would you say?
Why not keep going? Why not? What's what's on the other side? And the answer is probably fear. Well, fear you can overcome, right? So why not? Why not keep moving? And I think the other one is somebody loves you. even when you feel unlovable, right? And I think as a podcast person, I want to be like, I love you at least, but like, I don't know you. In a way, I do like and reach out. I would love to chat, like if anyone's in that moment and I could be helpful. The nice thing, I don't have a huge following and audience, so I'm pretty available for people in that way. But somebody loves you. Like I have not, I am yet to meet someone in person that doesn't love somebody else, right? So like there is somebody out there, and find that person. And then I think even maybe more importantly, be that person for other people. One thing I love to do when I speak, I'm giving away like some tricks, but I stole this from someone else, so I guess fair enough. But if I'm doing it, and I don't, I haven't done massive keynotes at this point, but that's something in my aspirational goals because I love to think and then share ideas. But one thing I do when I host webinars or anything is at the very beginning, I ask people, especially in person, webinars is weird, but in person, get your phones out and turn the sound on, which is not typically what someone would do. And I say, text somebody that you love them, and a concrete reason why. And then we wait. And then you start to hear ping, 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 right? And then you start to see people see what other people have come back. And I'm like goosebumps right now, right? Because it elevates the humanity in the room, and it's so awesome. So if you're still listening to this, which I know statistically you're not because we're past 45 minutes, if you are, do that right now. Like text someone in your life that you love them and why, and the response you're going to get is going to be so powerful. And that's the why not keep going right there. So if you are struggling, instead of thinking about your struggle, tell someone why you love them, and their response to you is going to answer your own question of why not. Now, if it's like you're struggling with like an injury or something that's not as like, I mean, I went real deep with that, but on the surface, it's the same. They're like, why not keep going? Like, what's the alternative to healing the injury and continuing to pursue your passion of fitness? Being injured forever? No, right? Like, so I think sometimes just really facing and saying, why wouldn't I keep going? What's on the other side of the keep going? Goodness, probably. Might be a journey. Might take a while. But ultimately that's where you're headed. If you don't keep going, it opens up other doors, right? Where you might get goodness, but it would be happenstance. Or you may never reach that goal you wanted, and then you feel discouraged, or at least disappointed. So why not keep going?
That will go down as one of my favorite answers to that question in 162 plus episodes. And
I'll take it.
yeah, and as someone who loves public speaking, there are a select few of us out there in the world, but I'll have to take that and credit you after you having taken that from whoever else, because that's a beautiful social experiment, whatever you want to call it. And the fact that, I mean, I got goosebumps listening to that, and it makes me
You
want
probably
to,
thought of people that you would have texted, Yeah.
oh, yeah. So, with all of that being said, Ryan, if people got something from this conversation, which I know they did, if they want to reach out, connect with you, stay in touch so that when the book comes out, eventually they can get a copy, where's the best place for people to do that?
Yeah, I have an Instagram. I am not the biggest social media advocate, so if you follow me, I won't like blow up your thread, but I do have one. Um, Also, though, I'm actually more active on LinkedIn. I tend to be a little more active on LinkedIn. I just find that to be a platform that fits my style a little bit better at this point in my life. And then I also just revamped my website, which includes a way to sign up for emails from me, which I don't do on a regular basis. Like I'm not an every Tuesday situation, but I am. I had an interesting thought, so I'm going to share it and I'm going to put it out on this email. I don't call it a newsletter because it's not regular. But if you're interested in what I'm thinking about, or you have questions or thoughts that you think I would be benefit to write about, I also love when people email me and say, "Hey, I'm struggling with, I'm thinking about, or I'm freaking crushing it with this thing." I love to get those things to spark my ideas of what I can write about and contribute. So, yeah, email me honestly, and you can email me through the website really easily. So that's that's the most direct for sure.
Well, I will link things below. Just followed you on LinkedIn. I can't believe we weren't connected there.
Yeah,
I'm
that's funny. I didn't know that either.
I am on LinkedIn as well, and I've kind of made this commitment to post every Monday. I post a thought to start off the
Nice.
week, and it's the most on LinkedIn content you've ever seen, because I don't know how LinkedIn works. So I just post my thoughts.
Me either.
But we're gaining traction. And even if one person sees it and benefits from it, it's well worth it. And I mean, just on record before we close things out, I feel so encouraged, inspired, loved even, through this
You are.
conversation. Yeah. And I just appreciate you so much, Ryan. And so thank you for this. I'm looking forward to catching up even more after this episode. And I know that people are really going to love this when it comes out.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I appreciate just the chance to have a good conversation. That's what I love the most. And if anyone else wants to have those, I'm around. Joe's around. So yeah, we'll link up and we'll do this again. So thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Ryan. If you enjoyed this episode of the Project Indoor podcast, go ahead and subscribe, leave a review on your platform of choice, and share this episode with a friend. It helps us get more conversations like this out to more people like you. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you next time. And one more thing. If you're looking for a community of people all striving to be better together, check out the Project Indoor Hard Things Club. The link is in the description below. We'd love to have you.